Hey guys, it's Mike here, and Bardock is one of the most popular characters in the Dragon Ball franchise. Despite not really having a lot of screen time in the mainline story, Bardock has gone on to be featured in video games, merchandise, posters, and a wide variety of other things throughout the course of the Dragon Ball fandom. However, with that being said, for me, there is one major issue with Bardock as a character. One thing involving Goku's father, which ultimately ends up being, in many ways, kind of his undoing as a character. And that would have to be that despite the fact that Bardock was a tragic character from the past, he has continually been brought back into the story, all in line with the law of diminishing returns. In other words, this means that every time Bardock comes back, he actually is even more lessened as a character because of it. And I'm going to be getting into exactly why in this video. So let's get into that right now, beginning with Bardock's first appearance and going through all of his appearances in the mainline version of the Dragon Ball story. So everything for Bardock really began in the Dragon Ball Z Bardock, the Father of Goku Special, which is his actual debut in the Dragon Ball franchise. A lot of people seem to believe that Bardock was actually created by Akira Toriyama, but that isn't really the case. Rather, he was created by the Toei Animation staff who created the special in order to kind of fill in the slots in between the Dragon Ball story evolving and revolving around Goku and Frieza's combat and inserting a character that would create a greater sense of connective tissue between the two of them. Because at that point in the story, everyone knew that Goku was going to go up against Frieza, but Goku didn't really have an inherent connection to Frieza in anywhere near the same degree as a Vegeta who actually remembered the planet and his family, whereas for Goku, they were just something in the past that he disregarded. It wasn't until Toriyama saw this special that he actually introduced Bardock as a little bit of a cameo in the manga. In Toriyama's version of the original story, this is the entirety of Bardock's introduction and really existence within the manga, where basically Vegeta calls Goku Kakarot, which causes Frieza, as you could see here, to be confused. He says, wait a second, Kakarot? That name is Saiyan. Oh, and this is when he recognizes Goku. And he says, he looks just like the Saiyan who resisted until the end, when I destroyed Planet Vegeta. And you could actually see right here Frieza remembering him, which of course is Toriyama's little throwback to what we see right here with the exact same shots basically taken, the same design of the armor and so on. And as we could see in the next panel, this is Bardock's outroduction, let's say, in the story, where we see that little shot of Frieza superimposed over Bardock being blasted by that attack, that giant death ball that he unleashes upon him. And it says, neither Frieza nor Goku knew that the Saiyan Frieza killed that day was Bardock. Or Bardock, Bardoku. You could get into a Mr. Fusion's video where he breaks down the naming conventions of everything. Goku's father. So this is really all we get to see of Bardock in the Dragon Ball manga. Toriyama wasn't really interested himself in getting into Goku's familiar heritage and everything else along those lines in his actual story that he was writing and drawing every week. And so he basically just borrowed something that Toei had created and inserted it into his own manga, which is kind of funny because that's a very rare instance where the anime kind of got the head start on Toriyama and led to him putting something from the anime into the manga. Although there are some other instances, which maybe I'll get into someday as well. Now, after this, Bardock in this story, he was a badass space pirate. He was one of the Frieza Force's Saiyan army, basically, in which he was going about wiping out the planets or the inhabitants of different planets so that Frieza could sell these planets for profit to who we never get explained. I don't know who would buy a planet from Frieza, especially because he could just blow it up if they piss him off. But nonetheless, what ended up happening was that during that, Bardock got the ability to see the future from one of the last inhabitants of a planet that he wiped out, which allowed him to see his own tragic ending, the tragic ending of his people that, Bardock tries to, in some ways, stop and prevent. And as a result, what occurs is that he goes to fight against Frieza, attacking him in vain, trying to defend his planet, but ultimately failing. He was a truly tragic character. He didn't even get to see his son Goku before before he was sent off to the planet Earth. And that was all kind of a random happenstance. Oh, we'll send this weak, low-class Saiyan with a very low power level off to another planet so that he could depopulate it and grow stronger for future missions. No one even knew that Frieza was going to destroy the planet at this time in this version. And that for me is really the best version of Bardock, a character who failed. He fought in vain and it ended up accomplishing nothing in the end. And it goes to show you that, the father still passes on to the son in the sense to where they both fight Frieza. The son overcomes him. But ultimately, what ended up happening was that the father lost and failed completely in everything he really sought to do, whereas the son was the one to succeed in his stead, the next generation. So I think that was the best version of Bardock, and what really gave us his appeal. Not only is he a badass-looking version of Goku, basically, who didn't really care about killing and wiping characters out and stuff like that, but that he was a failure, that he was not somebody who succeeded, and ultimately it gave more weight to the connection between Frieza and Goku, and also really added more darker layers to the Dragon Ball story. But of course, because Bardock was such a popular character, they couldn't just let him rest in peace. Instead, we got the Bardock episode of Bardock Special, which was created not by Toriyama, but by somebody who at one point was going to be his successor. I believe it was Oishi. You guys can correct me down below because you guys know that I'm the best at pronouncing names on here, aren't I? But anyway, during this, Bardock actually survived his planet being blown up right next to him, and somehow instead of the blast hitting Bardock, well, it hit the planet and it sucked him back in time through a black hole, and he ended up going back to the early Planet Vegeta, Planet Plant, where he eventually became a Super Saiyan, and he ended up fighting Chilled, the ancestor of Frieza, which is basically a doppelganger of the earliest form of Frieza that we see, and defeating him. And through defeating him, that's where the idea of the Super Saiyan legend came from, because Goku's dad, Bardock, was actually the Super Saiyan the entire time, 1,000 years ago. I hate the episode of Bardock. I know that you guys might, be surprised to hear that somebody in this fandom just hates this, but I do. I've never liked it. I've always just thought it's one of the kind of, in many ways, dumbest things that they ever did in the Dragon Ball story, and it utterly diminishes Bardock as a character, as well as the Super Saiyan legend, Goku's significance of becoming one. Really, take your pick, because even though cool, Bardock gets like a skin swap, like in a fighting game, and he has a Super Saiyan form now, and he's fighting against a character that kind of looks like Frieza, and he kind of gets his revenge, I guess, even though we don't even know how far removed from Frieza and King Cold this character even is, and why nobody ever mentioned him, and so on and so forth. So that was their way of continuing Bardock's story, Bardock's legend, and giving him an episode of his own, and, beyond the first one where he died, and saying, oh, no, wait, he didn't die. He just died alone on Planet Plant because he was the only Saiyan there, I guess, because, this was like 1,000 years before they even settled the planet, and that's it, I guess. Also, none of those characters looked like the Tuffles. That's kind of strange. But either way, this was a big step down from Bardock as a character in general, and something that I feel like diminished his character overall. Then, they weren't finished yet, guys, though, because what happened next? Well, years later, Toriyama decided to give his own crack at Bardock, to make his own canon version of it, and that's where we got Dragon Ball Minus, where they gave a more detailed version of Toriyama's version, I guess, or modern Toriyama's version, because we always have to separate, the original Toriyama and this Toriyama from the current age, probably because he was abducted by aliens and cloned or something. But either way, what ended up happening was that we find out more about Bardock in this version of the story, what Toriyama's idea of this character was. And, during this, he has a different armor that doesn't actually line up with what he had in the Dragon Ball Z manga, or really the Dragon Ball manga, or the original special. And the entire time, Bardock is, despite the fact that he's fighting against these characters and wiping them out, he still already has some kind of antagonistic feel toward Frieza. Look at what he says right here, where they're saying, we're almost there. It's been a while since we've been back. But what's the meaning of this? Apparently, it was an order from that damn Frieza. So Bardock already has a kind of a negative view of Frieza as a character, and he automatically just assumes that something is wrong, despite the fact that he can't see into the future or anything in this version of the story. He just, for some reason, has a hunch that there's more to all of this than he thought. You know, maybe Frieza's throwing like a birthday party for the Saiyans. Who the heck knows? But he just immediately assumes that Frieza's up to no good and is going to wipe them all out. And this is where we say, oh, have you heard why we're summoned back? Oh, the guys from Frieza's army were asking around about a Super Saiyan. A Super Saiyan, as in the legendary Super Saiyan, you know, the thing that Bardock is in the episode of Bardock. Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan God. So this is where they also introduce the idea that Frieza knew what a Super Saiyan God is for some reason, and as a result, that's part of why he wanted to wipe them out, because, you know, different legends he doesn't believe in. You know, we learn even more about Goku's backstory with his mother, for example, and you know, basically, what do we see here? Goku even in one of those incubators, which we saw in the special, but again, quite different in this variation of the story. And so just because Bardock, for some reason, has a hunch, they decide to take Goku out of his incubation chamber to go steal a space pod and send him away to a different planet because they think the planet is going to be destroyed. Stop me if you've heard this whole backstory before, because it's from another character who is an alien from another planet who also got sent to the Earth by his parents because they were afraid the planet was going to be destroyed and nobody else actually listened to them. Dun, 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 dun. But anyway, that is basically what we end up having here. Bardock is a very loving father in this case who picked it up from Goku's mother Gine, who we'd never even heard mentioned before. And basically what ended up happening was that, you know, despite the fact that every other Saiyan on the planet for the most part is like a ruthless pirate who wanted to wipe out who wanted to wipe out pretty much everyone other than them and wanted to rule the universe. In this version, Bardock is a really happy father, and, you know, he has a wife who works in a meat factory, and they send Goku away in his armor, even though he looked nothing like this in the version, the manga that we actually saw before. And what ends up happening? Well, they end up destroying the planet, of course. And then when we get, you know, eventually that fated child grew up to become a fine man and face unknowingly his nemesis, Frieza. So they Toriyama, for whatever reason, decide to increase the similarities between Superman and Goku with this backstory, making it way more like Jor-El and his wife sending sending Superman as a baby to the Earth, although for some reason making him look a little bit older than he was, changing up the entire timeline. And I know that this isn't all just from Superman. Originally, the story actually came from Moses in the Bible, and Superman was heavily inspired by that because of the creators and their own beliefs. And so as a result, you know, this goes back thousands of years. It's not something that's directly ripped off from Superman. And for all we know, Toriyama has read the Bible like many other great writers, and as a result is aware of that. But nonetheless, that's a whole other tangent in and of itself. The point here is that they totally changed Bardock's character once again in order to be something that really doesn't line up necessarily with what we saw in the original version of the story, right? When it actually lets me press over and say here. And finally, they wouldn't be done with any of that because, well, not necessarily finally yet. We also got basically the exact same story retold from Dragon Ball Minus in Dragon Ball Super Broly. You can even see they literally borrowed the exact same frame right here directly from the manga that Toriyama created at the end of the Jocko Galactic Patrolman manga. So as a result, we end up getting the same story retold, a little tweaks here and there. He actually does look a little bit more like this version of Bardock at the end when he's resisting Frieza, but nonetheless, it was just more added additional backstory and contextualization to Bardock and to Goku and his whole backstory that we see here, just retold because the vast majority of this fandom don't actually read the manga. And if you do, let me know down below because I appreciate you. But that's not the last time they brought Bardock back either, because they don't stop bringing him back. And then we actually got him returning again in the Dragon Ball Super manga. And if you don't want me to spoil this, maybe you should click off the video. But nonetheless, what ended up happening was that in the Dragon Ball Super manga, they do even more backstory about how Bardock was actually helping out this elder Namekian, Monaito, who also created his own Dragon Balls, and actually Bardock was involved in a story about the Dragon Balls and actually made a wish on them. Because Bardock knowing about the Dragon Balls and everything involving that is a great storytelling idea. Don't you think so, everybody? Well, you might, but I don't. But the point of the matter is that again and again, we see the same thing. Bardock comes back. He goes from being this awesome, badass Goku-esque character who fights against Frieza and fails in vain, and that's all he ever really needed to be. That was all his appeal at the time, to, you know, coming back again as a Super Saiyan and defeating an ancestor of Frieza, and then coming back again in a different version of the story where he's actually, you know, a good father and something that Goku isn't. I'm just kidding. And what ends up happening next? Oh, he comes back again, and he's in the exact same situation, but in a Dragon Ball Super movie. And then he comes back again, and he's now involved in a story with the Dragon Balls and Namekians and characters that he probably never should have even known anything about. And then he came back again. Well, not yet, but he's probably going to come back again because this is Dragon Ball, and they don't love to stop, or they don't hate bringing back the same characters over and over again if they get, you know, merchandise sales out of it. So overall, the point of all of this is that for me, Bardock was actually best with his original version of the story, and with that being said, we didn't really need anything further elaborated on with him. We didn't need for him to be expanded upon. We didn't need for him to be this amazing dad who helped to send his son away to make sure that he didn't die because he just somehow knew for some reason that Frieza was going to destroy the planet and wipe out their entire species. We didn't need him to, you know, fight against other characters that would become relevant later in the story or this or that. We didn't need any of that. We just didn't really even need Bardock to begin with as a character, actually, considering the fact that Toriyama didn't even come up with him. It was kind of a way to enhance the story, though. That is one thing I will say. Sometimes there are things that the anime did, Toei did, that did actually help to enhance the Dragon Ball story. There are certain variations, let's say in the anime compared to the manga, that are actually handled better than what Toriyama did initially. However, with that being said, ironically, Toriyama, I think, handled Bardock, a character he didn't create, even worse in his own version of the story in Dragon Ball Minus, which came out as a part of the Jocko manga that I have behind me somewhere. And the fact of the matter is that he never really should have touched him at all because he didn't really need to. He was perfect the way he was already. He never needed anything more. And the more they bring this character back, with video games, I didn't even really show anything with Bardock like his Time Breaker or characters like that either. And the fact of the matter is that the more they bring him back, and I won't be surprised if they keep bringing him back in the future. They might actually bring him back to life in the future just because so many fans want to see him meet Goku for some reason. The fact of the matter is that it just is going to diminish him further because of the fact that ultimately he was better off left in the past. Well, my name is Mike. Thank you all for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. I know that this is probably going to be a hot take in this community. And make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.
And you better subscribe!